Imagine a time before records, CDs, TV, iPods, or even radio. There's no restaurants with piped music, no movies, no movie themes. The music that was heard was all acoustic, live, and local. The main entertainment was barn dances and garden parties. By age 11, boys and girls were encouraged to go to dances along with their parents, not because there was no other entertainment, but because that's how people connected to one another. Everyone had some musical ability. Your music was your identity. It was something you acquired from your country of origin, your community, and your family. It wasn't so much that you had a playlist on your cell phone or your CD collection, like some people have today. There was a small selection of tunes that you would sing or play that you associated with yourself. That melody could be your own invention, or it could be something that you heard and liked. Perhaps you could play or sing it verbatim, but more than likely, you would add your own spin to that tune. It was these tunes which Elmo Wick would eventually write down years later. Music from a time when people were their own entertainment and everyone learned by ear. Elmo Wick grew up near a small town called Sunberg, Minnesota, in Candiothi County in central Minnesota. This area was, and remains somewhat to this day, predominantly Norwegian. According to one source I spoke to, everyone who lived in Sunberg was Norwegian or of Norwegian descent, except for the undertaker, Mr. Dahlquist. He was Swedish, which is why some people in town said that the Swedes will always get you in the end. Many of the farms did not get electricity until 1947. The roads were not paved until the 1950s, and the services in the local churches were all in Norwegian, until about 1960 when concessions were made to at least have one service in English. Elmo wrote that he remembered his grandfather playing hardanger with the Henshin brothers in 1929. I found this interesting because young Elmo would have only been 5 or 6 years old at that time. I think it shows what a big impression music, specifically Norwegian hardanger, made on young Elmo. Also, the fact that the Henshins lived on the border of an undeveloped state park made the young boy think that perhaps they were on the edge of wilderness. Elmo's father and grandfather would often host a talented fiddle-playing neighbor, Oliver Sagdahl. Elmo recounted in a newspaper article that he used to stay awake listening to the trio play until 2 a.m. The Sagdahl family had a long and distinguished reputation. Oliver's grandfather, Elling Sagdahl, was a famous hardanger luthier. His creations were highly desired in the Norwegian community, and his playing was legendary. Elling's youngest son, Ole, had inherited the farm, and also played fiddle on the hardanger. Ole had 8 sons, not quite enough to field a baseball team, but enough to start a band. 5 of the brothers did start a band called, aptly enough, the 5 Sagadals. Of the 5, Henry Sagdahl and Oliver Sagdahl went on to become professional musicians. Oliver was the most accomplished player of the Sagdahl family, and I don't wonder that young Elmo didn't suffer from a bit of hero worship. Oliver was 20 years older than Elmo, and Elmo reported in a newspaper article that he studied under and played with Oliver Sagdahl, who lived less than 2 miles from the Wick homestead. Elmo got his first fiddle when he was 11 years old. His father and 2 uncles drove a Model A 5 hours and 100 miles to a Minneapolis pawn shop to buy a 3/4 sized fiddle for $1.50. This would have been about 1935. Elmo learned a lot of tunes from his father and grandfather, but also other relatives. According to some of Elmo's notes, he learned Ole's polka from his uncle Ole Eriksson, his mother's brother, who spent that very hard, cold winter of 1936 at the Wick farm. He also credited learning a tune to his dad's brother, John Wick, who taught young Elmo Johnny's jig. However, it wasn't long before young Elmo would be influenced by the local community. In 1938, a neighbor farmer died, and Elmo had the opportunity to buy the fiddle of the deceased. He gathered up a jar of saved nickels, dimes, and pennies and walked through the cold wind to make his purchase. I wonder if that deceased farmer might have been Olio Flolo. He died at around the same time, and Elmo collected at least one tune, the Flolo Waltz, from this well-known fiddle player who'd had his own band in the 1890s, the Flolo Trio, which consisted of Ole, his brother Carl on viola, and Havel Wig, who was the Wick's next-door neighbor. Olaus Jorgensen, a man reputed to play guitar with his feet while he played fiddle at the same time, lived less than 2 miles west of the Wick farm. So it's very possible that Elmo spent some time playing with Olaus. Olaus's wife had died in 1936 and he lived alone in an old farmhouse. He did carpentry work to make ends meet, and he spent his spare time practicing fiddle when he wasn't working. He also made his own fiddles. In 1947, as electricity came to Sunberg, Olaus refused to have his house hooked up to the system because he'd heard that electricity was dangerous. By 1940, 16-year-old Elmo was making $5 a night playing at dances. As a farm laborer, he could only make $3.50 a day. A career in music seemed much more profitable than farming. Young Elmo gradually transitioned from moonlighting as a fiddler at dances to joining a band and playing towns and cities further afield than Sunberg. It was in October of 1940 when radio came to Willmar, Minnesota. KWLM got its license to operate, and it was immediately accepted because 1 month after coming on the air, the Armistice Day blizzard struck, which killed 49 people and left many, such as Oliver Sagdahl and his band, stranded at remote farmhouses. Radio proved its worth that week by announcing the names of who was safe and who had died. After that event, each day's radio program was scheduled and listed in the Willmar Tribune. The broadcasts were all live, and sadly, there are no recordings of any of the programs. We only have a few photographs and some of the stories of those groundbreaking days. One of the first shows to hit the airwaves was the wildly popular Morris Chargo. Morris was a Ukrainian musician band leader who immigrated to the United States in 1924 and had moved to Willmar in 1929. Morris Chargo's band also included Oliver Sagdahl. These were still the pioneering days of radio, and in that time, running a radio program was an adventure. There was also that incident where Morris Chargo ran out of material early in a program, and so began an improvisational riff about how a load of traveling circus animals had escaped from their boxcars while stopped at the Willmar train station. As he recounted this wild tale, African lions and Bengal tigers roamed the streets of Willmar in search of fresh meat. A fire broke out at the creamery just outside of Willmar, causing the fire alarms to be sounded throughout the town. Many of the Willmar residents suddenly realized that Morris's story might actually be true. Parents rushed out to pick up their loved ones from PTA and Cub Scout meetings, armed with shotguns or pistols or any other firearm that might be used to fend off an attack of ferocious animals. Needless to say, Morris Chargo was famous. Or if not famous, at least he was infamous. Between 1942 and 1944, while Elmo was a member of the Harry Forsman Band, he made some appearances on the Morris Chargo radio show. I think this made a big impression on Elmo. He was part of something bigger. He was there playing with his childhood mentor, perhaps hero. Elmo married Melba Gunderson in September of 1945. The couple moved to Willmar in 1947 and later to Bruton, Minnesota. Elmo got a job with the Candy, Ojai Highway Department as a heavy equipment operator, where he worked for 37 years. He and his wife raised 9 children. Working all day and playing all night didn't work out once he was married with children. So the fiddle was hung on the wall as decoration for 29 years, a souvenir of more carefree days. Sometime in the 1970s, Elmo got into a snowmobile accident and broke his leg. As Elmo told it, for a month he had nothing to do but sit around the house, listen to the radio, and stare at the fiddle that hung on that wall. Elmo eventually took the fiddle off the wall and began learning to play again. It wasn't long until Elmo began looking for someone to play with. There was a radio show on Sunday mornings, Cliff Gandrud's Scandinavian Melodies on KBMO of Benson, Minnesota. Cliff Gandrud had also grown up in the area around Sunberg, so Elmo may have crossed paths with Cliff many years before. Cliff played traditional Norwegian tunes on an accordion, and he often hosted local musicians on his radio show. Contacting Cliff brought Elmo into the orbit of several local musicians, namely Carl Harris and Kenny Amundsen, a well-established fiddling dynasties from Swift County, as well as Arlen and Henry Erickson, a father-son duo from Pope County. Elmo began going to fiddle contests and jam sessions, some of them quite far afield. After Elmo retired from the Candy-Ojai Highway Department in 1983, he had much more time to spend playing fiddle. He also had enough time to make his own hardanger fiddle, a task which he said took him 200 hours. Elmo became a board member of the Hardanger Fiddle Association of America shortly after its founding in 1983. He also volunteered as a teacher for the Hardanger Fiddle Association, where he was much loved by his students because he was first and foremost a real honest-to-God dance fiddler. According to Elmo, the beat ruled. Elmo was renowned for stomping out the beat with his big size 13-toed work boots while he played fiddle. He was a string section and a percussion section all in one. Elmo was once again playing gigs, but radio and television had changed the music scene. There was not the demand for dance bands as had once been the case. Family farms were becoming a thing of the past, replaced with large corporate farms which could produce food much more efficiently. Music was something that had been delegated to professionals. The days of community music was also being lost. The art of fiddle playing was dying. Elmo set himself out to encourage fiddle playing. One action that he took was to start the Minnesota State Fiddlers Association in 1986 to host fiddle contests. He still played fiddle contests himself and donated his winnings to the Fiddlers Association. Elmo's real task was to document old tunes which he had learned by ear, but as far as he knew, these tunes had never been written down. Elmo had been learning how to read music, and he began the difficult task of notating those tunes from his youth, which he'd learned by ear, onto paper so that they would not be forgotten. Elmo ended up donating his collection of music to various organizations. One collection of music was sent to the Hardanger Fiddle Association of America. These were traditional Norwegian tunes, mostly intended to be played on hardanger fiddle. The second collection of music went to the Minnesota State Fiddlers Association. It was this second set of music for which Marypat Kleven got an art grant from the state of Minnesota in 2016, so that a number of musicians could learn, play, and post on YouTube. The handwritten sheet music was cleaned up, published, and distributed, and was taught at a number of workshops. After spending a year researching the lives of the names on that sheet music, I realized how, back in the day before television and internet, so many more people played music for their own enjoyment, specifically fiddle, but not limited to it. Music and dance was a means of connecting with other people. Technology tends to keep us from interacting with one another as people once did. The people named in Elmo's music were not spectators or consumers of music. Music for them was a contact sport which brought people together. I also realized that these people were not professional musicians. They all had day jobs doing farming, carpentry, cutting hair, or even road construction. The point is, you don't need to be a superstar to perform music, or any art for that matter. The point is that you do some art. Technology allows us to see the world, but doing art allows us to understand it.